Soft mist curled at my peripheries like steel wool scratching at my brain. Blackness prevailed, before everything suddenly seemed to switch to video footage, as if projected just ahead. Haze sat beside me, though both of us watched in silence. For the Society's consideration, flashed in dirty yellow text, remaining over a black screen for several seconds before cutting to 19063, Ebbing Matthews Manor. Styx, Hound. The camera spilled into focus to frame a tall, well-dressed man at a workstation. It was a room I had never seen before, but clearly a basement of some sort. Did a room like that exist in the manor? No one had ever talked about a basement. A feeble, sickly mouse scurried in a small wooden corral, limping on one leg and bearing several shave marks where it was clearly tested on. The man addressed the camera in silence, no title card showing up to explain his words. The footage jumped ahead several seconds, running at an uneven speed and jittering again with scratch marks. When it finally refocused, the camera had changed position, the mouse lying dead on its side as a trail of smoke softly rose from its eye sockets. 2 electric prongs in its neck were connected to a large battery, the voltage meter having long since gone back down to 0. The man steadily removed the prongs, leaving the dead mouse where it lay. The man spoke again, reading his lips impossible as he quickly worked another large rubber glove onto his hand, pulling large, reflective goggles over his eyes. Another figure walked in then, one I immediately recognized as Thomas Matthews, my grandfather, from what little pictures I had seen of him. He looked young, though, far younger than I would have expected. He also wore what easily equated to an early hazmat suit, rubber gloves and reflective goggles, though, cradled in his arms, was a small, black blur. The camera had a hard time focusing on it. It looked sick and more than half dead, limp tail missing fur in patches as gangrene began to claim its lower left leg. A repulsive muzzle was fastened so tight around its mouth that flesh had begun to heal over the rusted metal that cut into its jaw. It slowly lifted its head, only to be pushed back down by my grandfather's gloved hand. They looked terrified of it. More silent talking ensued before the camera again glitched ahead several seconds, the creature being slowly lowered in next to the lifeless mouse. The creature was unable to support its own weight, sinking quickly to the floor as the hands released it. Its black eyes were hidden amongst its ruffled fur, bloodied paws scraping along the splintered wood as it tried to feebly crawl out of the corral. As it did so, however, the camera flickered as if experiencing distortion. The mouse's leg twitched, the camera hurriedly being lifted from its tripod to zoom in on the occurrence. More silent dialogue. The mouse's legs began to flail more wildly, spasming as if in a blender before suddenly breaking into a clear run pattern. It didn't go anywhere, but it only took a gloved hand to set it upright before the creature, operating like a broken machine, charged directly into the far wall. It continued to run into it blindly, head pressed to the wood. The camera flashed back to the dog-like creature, limping weakly along before again sinking back to the floor. The footage flickered, cutting to the mouse as a hand again encroached into frame and held the scurrying creature steady. The footage suddenly glitched again, a hammer being driven into the mouse's skull. The little creature's head split open like porcelain, brain matter splattering the floor and sticking to the hammer as it pulled back. Another violent pile drive left the head to separate from the body as the hammer scraped its skull fragments away. Yet the mouse continued to run, not faltering in its stride. The dog shivered at the other end, sad, hollow eyes staring at the floor. It was only when the black-furred creature was steadily lifted out of the enclosure that the mouse suddenly stopped running, legs giving a spasmodic flail before its headless form slammed against the floor. The footage cut out with a violent spark of light, the projector grinding to a venomous halt. I slowly opened my eyes. A sink greeted me, my legs wobbling beneath me as a figure loomed to my right. It was pitch dark outside, snow rapping at the windows. The dishwater in front of me rapidly decayed into a hideous brown. Clouds of the fluid seemed to seep up from the bottom. Sylvia's face contorted in confusion as she leaned in closer. I, in turn, jerked my hands out of the water as I glanced around in panic. I was back in the kitchen. Where had I just been? Oh, God! Sylvia yanked her hand out of the water as she took a step back. Catch yourself on a knife? But my voice was numb, limbs frozen in their place from shock. Sylvia, where am I? What am I doing? The pots and pans around us were bathed in numb moonlight. No one else in the kitchen to cause the strange shadows slithering along them. The entire space whispered softly with haunted voices, my gaunt skin fighting against a cold I saw rather than felt. A howl sounded in the distant storm, something not unlike a wolf, but perhaps distorted slightly by the wind. I'll get a Band-Aid. Sylvia was quick to adjust herself. Knife, I echoed slowly, gaze darting to the sickly puncture wounds spilling out slimy, waterlogged blood, each divot placed precisely the same distance apart in a massive semicircle. My stomach flipped, Sylvia's fleeing form leaving white ghost trails in my vision as the wound only seemed to be growing in size the longer I stared. It looked uncanny. The placement and look reaching back at the far recesses of my mind like a meat hook and attempting to wrench something forwards that was meant to be forgotten. This thing looked like a massive bite mark. My arm was utterly and frighteningly numb in the face of this ghastly mutilation, my fingers responding to my movement normally despite beginning to look like they were severing from the rest of my flesh. Tendons just beneath the surface were slowly pooling into view. What had I just been doing? Why did I feel as if someone was in danger? The wind again gusted at the window to my right, moonlight spilling across the kitchen with stringy fingers. carrying the same howl as before. Almost closer now. Clattering resounded to my far left in the corner of the room, undoubtedly Sylvia frantically rummaging through our first aid kit in the storage locker. I unsteadily turned to face her, but suddenly stopped as something else about my arm caught my eye. It wasn't just bleeding blood. Black ooze softly pooled at my fingertips like washed away ink. No, wait. That's exactly what it was. Faded writing was barely visible on my pale flesh. My eyes narrowed as I brought up my arm to inspect it closer. It looked as if two phrases were written on top of each other. That's when I heard something softly dripping. My own blood splattered like faint and infrequent raindrops against the tiles, but that sound was mirrored in the distance behind me. I whirled around, the dark figure possessing a noticeable limp as their hands slowly twitched by their sides. Haze's face was slowly streaked with lingering moonlight as she stepped forwards, dead silver eyes unblinking as her stance wobbled like she was half asleep. I flinched back, eyes widening to consume more of the haunting darkness before me. Dark liquid pooled beneath her, trickling stream softly snaking down a gash faintly visible around her collar. "Careful, Elle," she softly nodded, eyes focusing. "Warm water will ruin the film stock." My blood chilled. I must escape. The words and memories flashed into my mind clear as day, my eyes darting to the ink on my hand, then back to the sink in terror. Amongst the shattered dishes and moldy decay, the black canister lay open, with film reel spilling from it. Large sections had been torn away, the footage scratched and ruined from being scrubbed in the glassware shards. A large spool of it strung from the maggot-infested sink across the floor, all the way to Sylvia's broken form standing in the corner of the kitchen, facing the wall. She seemed to be slowly eating it. I immediately flinched back as the dog-like creature's monstrous scream barraged the glass window, a lengthy shadow passing to block out the moonlight. "I made a mistake." Haze's pale skin shone like paper. "I've made a huge mistake." "What?" I shook my head, fingers grasping at the partially destroyed footage, feeling a tug as Sylvia's broken cadaver slithered it across the tiles. "What do we need to do? What the hell was film stock doing in the canister? Is this what we need?" We've seen it before," Haze repeated, clutching at her head as if experiencing intense agony. "I remember bits and pieces. We already did this. All of this. We've watched this footage before." A sudden massive blast of air left glass to spray like water, an ear-splitting howl screeching out from the window as black fur began tearing apart the foundation of the manor. "So what?" I replied in hysterics, using the corner of the sink to sever the film reel down the middle and break it from Sylvia. "What do we do now?" I bundled what was left back into the canister and spun around just in time to see Haze lower her head. "I don't know," she spoke softly, eyes fixed on her heels as snowflakes began to skirt across them. The creature's claws split through the decaying wood, leaving chilling wind to spill into the manor and whip at her tattered dress. A partial corpse sloshed its way around the corner, gnarled fingers extended towards her. Several more shadows loomed in on the kitchen. Sylvia finished up her length of footage, jaw popping unnaturally before she turned slowly, with a grisly smile extended across her face. Clambering resounded from overhead. This was it. Blood ran down Haze's neck and cheek, though she paid no attention to any of this. This was everything. There is no next. No more plan. All these years. How much of that time was I just trying the same thing over and over? A deafening scream from the creature outside barely made her flinch, nor did she move a muscle as the corpse gripped her shoulder hard, fingernails carving into her flesh. She simply stood stoically, numb mouth uttering out, "How long have I been in this pattern?" "Alright, fuck all of that!" I cried, clutching the canister hard and reeling it back. "Fuck that so damn hard!" Crack. The corpse buckled under the weight of the canister as I hacked it across its jaw. Its grip on Haze slipped, bones shattering as it collapsed to the ground with a violent crack. The canister splattered with skin that was liquefied upon impact, leaving a lasting mark on the corpse's face. Haze's eyes looked up in astonishment as I grabbed her wrist and frantically pulled her along. "I don't know how much you remember," I shook my head, "but I still don't know what the fuck is going on. I vaguely remember some kind of dog and a fucking zombie rat on this film, but what the fuck does that tell me? There's a projector on the third floor attic. If watching this footage, scratched or not, will get me closer to an answer, I don't give a shit if I forget again. We're not giving up. And I'm sure as fucking fuck not getting eaten because you're having an existential crisis or some shit. I feel like that happens every day here." Clawed, animalistic hands finally pried apart the window frame as we pushed out of the kitchen. A hideously dark form slithered in from outside, bathed in moonlight and snarling venomously. The manor lobby was scattered with countless corpses, some lying in partially frozen, decomposed heaps. Many others, however, stood upright with bowed heads, swaying softly as if a lineup of dolls. I couldn't tell if their heads were following us or not, but was forced to suddenly backpedal as I turned to see Aunt Cheryl's puppet-like form lying partially suspended at the base of the stairs. I again slashed the canister at her head, meaning to clear the way before her wrist snapped up, catching the canister mid-sweep with a hefty crack. The bone shattered, skin sizzling as if exposed to acid, but she remained upright, a toothy, rotten smile crawling across her face. Her broken hand swiveled to grip the canister tightly, my eyes widening as her fingers peeled backwards from it. Snap! Haze pivoted with enough force to uproot carpet, slicing Cheryl's legs out from under her with a powerful kick. The corpse's kneecaps inverted, head smashing against the railing as I yanked back the canister and immediately started back up the stairs. "Thanks," I breathed. "The projector's in my room." Haze just nodded beside me. "You're right. We're not done here yet." She took another breath, silver eyes narrowing with determination. "And thank you," she whispered, looking to the ground. "I don't know what's real anymore. but I know I wasn't meant to do this alone. Thank you. The creature screamed a guttural, horrible roar that shook the foundation of the manor. I stole a glance behind us to see that the corpses had all quietly turned towards us. The emptiness and silence lasted for less than a second, an eerie eye of the storm, before a Goliath blur of blackness exploded out from the kitchen, moving so fast it was immediately apparent we weren't ever going to outrun it. It tore across the carpet faster than my eyes could focus, crushing the staircase railings beneath it as it clawed its way upwards. It was impossible to see what it looked like, moving like an out-of-focus mirage that slithered rather than walked. The only visible features were tangled black fur and an infinitely long row of orca-like teeth that were neither curled in a smile or frown. Haze quickly came to the same realization as me as the door of her room cracked against the inside wall and she threw the projector at me in one fluid motion. Paper, pattern note, fluttering to the floor. Something tells me we can't use this in peace here. She cocked an eyebrow, eyes trying not to look as the creature reached the top step of the second floor. But what say you we close the door anyway and just hope that stops it? For shits and giggles.